Hold that angle. Hold it. The documentary cameraman shifted his weight on the cantilevered terrace. Lens trained on Beau Mercer's jawline as the billionaire gazed across the New Mexico desert like he'd personally sculpted every mesa on the horizon. Mr. Mercer, can you describe what it feels like to own the most ambitious private residence in the American Southwest? Beau's smile was a weapon. Practiced. Expensive. It feels like the future finally arrived at my doorstep. Wendy Wise stood 15 feet behind the interview setup, clipboard in hand, invisible in the way that anyone without a net worth was invisible to men like Beau Mercer. She wasn't supposed to be watching the show. She was supposed to be documenting punch list items for the structural team before the gala. But something had caught her attention. The chandelier. 40,000 hand-blown glass, orbs suspended from a custom track system. It had trembled 3 seconds ago. Not wind. Not footsteps. Something beneath. Wendy pulled a pencil from behind her ear. A yellow number 2, chewed at the eraser end, and walked quietly toward the nearest glass wall. The massive panes were set into steel frames that disappeared into the concrete floor, giving the illusion that the house floated above the arroyo below. She found what she was looking for near the base of the third panel. A hairline fracture, barely visible unless you knew to look. Wendy crouched and drew a small line across the crack's endpoint with her pencil. She noted the time on her clipboard. 2:47 p.m. And the charity gala will showcase exactly what's possible when vision meets resources, Beau was saying, his voice carrying across the polished concrete. 300 guests. The governor. A live broadcast. This house will prove that architecture can be brave. The chandelier quivered again. Wendy looked up, looked down at her pencil mark. The crack had moved, a millimeter past her line. In 90 seconds. She stood slowly, pulse ticking up, and walked toward the interview cluster. She needed to tell someone. Callum Rook, the starchitect, was standing just off camera, arms crossed, admiring his own creation. Mr. Rook, Wendy said quietly, touching his elbow. I need to show you something. Callum glanced at her the way one might glance at a moth near a lamp. Can it wait? We're in the middle of. No, it can't. Something in her voice made him follow, though his expression suggested he was already composing his dismissal. At the glass wall, Wendy pointed. I marked this crack at 2:47. It's now 2:49. The fracture has extended past my mark. Callum squinted. That's not, he leaned closer. His face changed. That's thermal movement. Differential expansion. Completely normal for a structure this size in desert conditions. At this rate? In this location? Wendy shook her head. This panel sits directly above the main cantilever. If there's settling in the foundation. There isn't. Then explain why the crack is migrating toward the. Excuse me. The voice cut through like a blade drawn from silk. Beau Mercer had noticed them. The cameras were still rolling, but he'd stepped away from his mark, and his publicist was making frantic hand signals that he ignored entirely. Is there a problem with my house? Wendy straightened. I'm documenting a crack in the glass that appears to be active. I marked it, and in the last 2 minutes. You marked it. Beau's gaze dropped to the pencil in her hand. With that? Yes. How quaint. The word landed like a slap. A few crew members exchanged looks. The cameraman hadn't stopped filming. Beau stepped closer, and Wendy understood for the first time why people called him magnetic. Not because he was charming, because he generated gravity that pulled everything toward his version of reality. What's your name? Wendy Wise. I'm with the structural documentation team. Documentation. He smiled. So you write things down. That's your job. You don't analyze. You don't design. You don't make decisions. I observe. And what I'm observing is thermal expansion, which Callum just explained to you. Beau's smile widened, performing for the crew, for the camera, for anyone who might be watching. But I appreciate the dedication. Very thorough. He said thorough the way someone else might say tedious. Callum cleared his throat. Wendy, why don't you continue your punch list? I'll handle any structural questions from here. The crack is still moving. Silence. Beau's smile didn't falter, but something behind his eyes shifted. A flicker of assessment. A predator noticing that a rabbit wasn't running. You're persistent, he said. I'll give you that. I'm accurate. There's a difference. For one long moment, no one breathed. Then Beau laughed, a warm, rolling sound that didn't reach his eyes. Someone get Ms. Wise a proper engineering team to bother. Callum, I need you for the terrace shots. He walked away. The gravity followed him. Wendy stayed where she was, looking at her pencil mark. The crack had moved again. A full 3 millimeters now. Maribel Gant appeared at her elbow, materializing with the eerie competence of someone who'd spent years anticipating needs before they were spoken. Ms. Wise. Her voice was pleasant and final. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable working from the site office for the remainder of the afternoon. I need to monitor this crack. You need to not be on camera when Mr. Mercer is giving interviews. Maribel's smile was flawless. Optics. I'm sure you understand. Wendy looked at her. Looked at the glass wall. Looked at the terrace where Beau Mercer was already resetting for another take, his profile catching the golden light like he'd ordered it personally from the sun. Fine, she said. But I'm logging this. Time-stamped. On record. You do that. Wendy walked toward the site office, her pencil still in her hand. Behind her, the chandelier trembled again. And across the terrace, for just one unguarded moment, Beau Mercer's gaze followed her. Not with amusement, not with disdain, but with something that looked almost like attention. He shook it off immediately, smiled for the camera, became once again the man who owned the future. But the crack kept moving, and Wendy Wise had already started counting. You called the city inspector? Beau Mercer's voice carried across the site office like ice cracking on a frozen lake. Calm. Controlled. Absolutely lethal. Wendy looked up from her laptop, where she'd been cross-referencing her crack measurements with the original structural plans. No, I didn't. Someone did. Beau stood in the doorway, blocking the morning light. Behind him, a white sedan with government plates was pulling into the construction lot. And now I have a bureaucrat with a clipboard about to walk through my home 3 days before I host the governor. Callum Rook squeezed past Beau, his face flushed with the particular panic of a man whose legacy was suddenly under federal scrutiny. This is a disaster. Do you understand what an active investigation does to the press narrative? I understand what an active crack does to 300 guests standing on a cantilever, Wendy said. Beau's jaw tightened. You think this is funny? I think this is physics. The sedan door opened. A woman in her 50s stepped out, wearing a hard hat, sensible boots, and the expression of someone who had seen every trick money could buy and remained unimpressed by all of them. Inspector Hale had arrived. The walkthrough took 47 minutes. Wendy followed at a distance, clipboard in hand, watching Inspector Hale tap walls, check joints, and ask questions that made Callum increasingly sweaty. Beau maintained his composure, but Wendy noticed his hands, clasped behind his back, knuckles white. The cantilever engineering is sound on paper, Hale said finally, standing at the exact spot where Wendy had marked the crack. But I'm seeing differential settling that shouldn't be present in a structure this new. Thermal expansion, Callum said quickly. Desert conditions. We accounted for. You accounted for uniform expansion. Hale pointed at the floor. This isn't uniform. Something's moving underneath. I'll need the original soil report. Silence. Mr. Rook? Hale raised an eyebrow. The soil report. The one your firm commissioned before breaking ground. Of course. I'll have my office send it over. I'd like it within the hour. Wendy watched Callum's face. Something flickered there, not quite guilt, but close. Recognition. As if he'd just remembered something he wished he hadn't. Beau stepped forward, all charm and authority. Inspector, I appreciate your diligence. We take safety seriously. But surely a conditional approval. Mr. Mercer. Hale's voice was flat. I don't care about your gala. I don't care about the governor. I care about whether this structure will be standing in 5 years. If I don't see proof of stability by end of day tomorrow, I'm issuing a stop work order and a public safety advisory. She walked out without waiting for a response. Beau turned slowly. His gaze swept the room. Callum, Maribel, the documentary crew who'd been filming everything, and finally Wendy. Everyone out, he said quietly. Except you. The room emptied in seconds. Even the cameraman hesitated, then retreated under Maribel's sharp gesture. Wendy stayed where she was. Beau approached her slowly, hands in his pockets now, posture deliberately relaxed. The predator playing casual. You documented that crack, he said. You made a record. Time-stamped. You told me to. Maribel told you to. His smile was thin. And now there's a paper trail. A junior member of the documentation team, on record, expressing concerns about structural integrity. If this goes sideways, where do you think the liability lands? Wendy felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her voice steady. On whoever signed off on the original engineering. That's what a reasonable person might think. Beau tilted his head. But reasonable doesn't play well on the news. Billionaire's mansion collapse predicted by concerned employee plays much better. You become the hero who is ignored. Or, he paused delicately, the panicky junior who cried wolf and created investor chaos. Which version are you planning to sell? Beau's smile widened. For a moment, something almost like admiration crossed his face. A hunter appreciating prey that refused to flinch. That depends entirely on what happens next. The crack is still moving, Wendy said. That's not panic. That's measurement. Measurements can be wrong. Mine aren't. They stood 3 feet apart. The desert light poured through the glass walls, painting everything golden, and Wendy understood with perfect clarity that this man could end her career with a phone call. One word to the right people, and she'd never work in structural documentation again. Mr. Mercer, she said, I'm not your enemy. The foundation is. Something shifted in his expression. A hairline crack of its own, uncertainty, quickly plastered over. Find me proof, he said. Real proof. Something I can show Inspector Hale that makes this all go away. And if the proof shows the opposite? If something is genuinely wrong. Beau's voice dropped to a murmur. Then you'd better hope you're wrong, Ms. Wise. Because I don't lose. Not publicly. Not ever. He walked out. Wendy spent the next 2 hours in the site archive, a portable trailer crammed with filing cabinets and dusty binders. The soil report should have been easy to find. It wasn't. What she found instead was a summary, a glossy, professionally formatted document that referenced a full geotechnical study but didn't include the raw data. The summary said the soil was stable. Compacted sandstone over ancient bedrock. Perfect for construction. But the summary didn't match what Wendy had seen with her own eyes. The pencil marks on her clipboard told a different story. The crack patterns suggested soil that was shifting laterally, not settling vertically. That meant water, moisture intrusion, something liquid moving through ground that should have been dry. She pulled up the site plans on her laptop and traced the drainage lines. Standard runoff management. Nothing unusual. Then she walked outside. The afternoon sun was brutal, but Wendy didn't care. She followed the slope of the land away from the mansion, past the sculptural landscaping, past the infinity pool that jutted over the arroyo like a dare. And she found it. A drainage outlet. Concrete. Recent. It wasn't on any of the plans she'd reviewed. Wendy crouched beside it, pulling out her pencil. She scraped at the edge of the concrete, feeling for moisture. Her fingertips came back damp. Someone had rerouted the drainage. Recently. Quietly. The water was flowing directly toward the foundation's weakest point, the footing beneath the cantilever. This wasn't thermal expansion. This wasn't settling. This was sabotage. Wendy stood slowly, her mind racing. The missing soil report. The polished summary. The crack that wouldn't stop moving. Someone had changed the ground rules, literally, and the mansion was paying the price. But who? And why? She looked back at the house, its glass walls blazing in the sunset. Inside, Beau Mercer was probably rehearsing his charm for the cameras, convinced that money could bend reality to his preference. He had no idea. Wendy pulled out her phone and took photos of the drainage outlet. Then she walked back toward the site office, pencil behind her ear, evidence in her pocket. Tomorrow, Inspector Hale would return, and Wendy Wise would have a very different story to tell. Who authorized this circus? Wendy stood at the edge of the site office parking lot, watching 3 black SUVs disgorge a parade of expensive suits. Callum Rook was already rushing toward them, arms spread wide in greeting, his relief almost embarrassing to witness. Maribel appeared beside her, tablet in hand, expression unreadable. Mr. Mercer called in reinforcements. The top structural consultants in the country. 2 flew in from New York, 1 from Chicago. To validate what he wants to hear? Maribel's smile was porcelain. To provide expert analysis. Mr. Mercer values expertise. He values agreement. There's a difference. Ms. Wise. Maribel's voice dropped, the pleasantness thinning like ice over deep water. A word of advice. These men have decades of experience, professional reputations, and the ear of every major developer in America. You have a pencil. Perhaps consider which voice carries more weight. She walked away before Wendy could respond. The experts commandeered the main living space like generals establishing a war room. Laptops opened. Laser levels appeared. Terms like finite element analysis and load path redundancy flew through the air with the confidence of men who'd never been contradicted by a building. Wendy stayed in the background, documenting. That was her job. That was all she was allowed to do. But she watched. And she listened. Dr. Harrison Vance, the lead consultant from New York, had silver hair and the theatrical presence of a man who'd testified before Congress. He walked the perimeter of the crack Wendy had marked, nodded thoughtfully, and pronounced his initial assessment. Cosmetic. Superficial stress fracturing in the glazing compound, not the structural members. Wendy's pencil stopped moving. The settling we're seeing, Vance continued, gesturing expansively, is within acceptable tolerances for a cantilevered structure of this ambition. Mr. Rook's engineering is sound. The foundation is sound. What we have here is a communication problem, not a construction problem. Beau Mercer stood by the window, arms crossed, watching. His expression revealed nothing, but Wendy could see the tension in his shoulders slowly unwinding. He was buying it. Every word. What about the soil report? Inspector Hale asked. She'd arrived 20 minutes earlier and had been standing in the corner like a statue of skepticism, unmoved by credentials or charm. The summary indicates stable bedrock, said Dr. Vance. Nothing in these readings contradicts that assessment. I asked for the full report, not the summary. Silence. Callum cleared his throat. There was a filing issue. My office is tracking down the original documentation. It should be available by. By when? Hale's voice was flat. Because I'm standing in a house that's moving, Mr. Rook. I can feel it in my feet. And nobody can show me the paper that proves it shouldn't be. Wendy stepped forward before she could stop herself. I can show you something. Every head turned. Beau's eyes found hers immediately, a warning, sharp and clear. Don't. She kept walking. The crack I documented yesterday has extended another 8 millimeters. Wendy held up her clipboard, pointing to her measurements. That's not cosmetic. That's active displacement. And this morning, I found a drainage outlet that isn't on any site plan. Dr. Vance frowned. A drainage outlet? Concrete. Recent construction. Directing water toward the main footing. Wendy pulled out her phone, swiping to the photos she'd taken. Someone rerouted the runoff. The soil under the cantilever is saturated. That's speculation, Callum said quickly. You're not a geotechnical engineer. No, but I can read a pencil mark. And I can recognize wet ground. Beau stepped away from the window, his footsteps deliberate on the polished concrete. The room's attention shifted to him like flowers following the sun. Ms. Wise, he said, his voice dangerously pleasant. I appreciate your enthusiasm. But we have 3 of the most respected structural consultants in America standing in this room. Perhaps we should let them do their jobs. Perhaps they should look at what I found. The silence stretched. Dr. Vance exchanged glances with his colleagues. The discomfort of important men being challenged by someone they'd already dismissed. I'll take a look, Inspector Hale said. Show me. The walk to the drainage outlet took 10 minutes. Wendy led the way, Hale beside her, while the parade of experts trailed behind with obvious reluctance. Beau stayed close, his presence a constant pressure at Wendy's back. Halfway there, chaos intervened. A desert bird, a roadrunner, bold and absurdly confident, darted across their path, snatched a gleaming laser pointer from Dr. Vance's pocket, and sprinted toward the scrub brush. What the? Vance lunged after it. The bird was faster. It zigzagged through the landscaping, the laser pointer clutched in its beak like treasure, leading Vance on a stumbling chase that destroyed any remaining dignity. Callum ran after him, shouting something about irreplaceable equipment. And within seconds, half the expert delegation was scrambling through the desert after a bird that clearly had no intention of being caught. Wendy stopped walking. Beside her, Inspector Hale made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. Your experts, Wendy said, are losing a fight to a roadrunner. Beau stood very still. His jaw was tight, but something flickered in his eyes. Not quite amusement, but close. The absurdity of the moment had cracked something loose. That bird is going to be a footnote in a very expensive lawsuit, he muttered. Maybe it just has good taste in shiny objects. Beau glanced at her. For one unguarded second, his mask slipped, and Wendy saw something underneath. Exhaustion, maybe. Or the loneliness of a man who'd built an empire on never admitting weakness. Then the mask returned. Show me the drainage outlet, he said quietly, before anyone else catches up. They stood at the concrete edge together, Hale crouching to examine the moisture seepage, Beau staring at the evidence like it had personally betrayed him. This isn't on any plan, Hale confirmed. Someone added this after final inspection. Who? Beau's voice was barely controlled. That's your question to answer, Mr. Mercer. I'm just telling you what I see. Hale straightened, brushing desert dust from her knees. The water table under your cantilever is compromised. Until I see proof that this has been addressed, my recommendation stands. No gala. No occupancy. She walked back toward the house without waiting for a response. Beau stood motionless, staring at the drainage outlet. The experts were still chasing the roadrunner somewhere in the distance, their shouts fading into the afternoon heat. You were right, he said finally, not looking at Wendy. I usually am. His head turned. That flicker again, irritation, respect, something else she couldn't name. This doesn't leave my property, he said. Whatever you think you know, whatever you think is happening, you don't go public. Not until I understand who did this and why. And if you try to bury it, then you'll be the first person I bury with it. His smile was razor-thin. Professional. He walked away. That night, someone entered the construction site after hours. The security footage would later show a figure in dark clothing, moving with purpose. They found Wendy's pencil marks on the glass wall, and tried to wipe them clean. but graphite leaves traces. And Wendy Wise had already photographed everything. Your badge has been deactivated. The security guard said it with the bored finality of someone who'd delivered bad news 1,000 times and stopped carrying around number 50. He held Wendy's access card between two fingers like it was contaminated. Deactivated by whom? Doesn't say. Just says you're no longer authorized for site access. He gestured toward the gate. I can call you a cab if you need one. Wendy stood in the morning sun, the mansion gleaming behind the security checkpoint like a taunt. 48 hours until the gala. 48 hours until 300 people stood on a foundation that was slowly drowning. And someone had just erased her from the premises. I need to speak with Mr. Mercer. Mr. Mercer is in a meeting. Then I'll wait. Ma'am. The guard's patience was thinning. You're not authorized to wait on this property. I'm going to have to ask you to. Let her through. The voice came from behind the guard station. Maribel Gant stepped into view, tablet clutched to her chest, her expression carefully neutral. Ms. Gant, my orders say. Your orders just changed. Maribel's smile didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Mercer wants to see her. Personally. The guard hesitated, then shrugged and handed back Wendy's badge. Reactivated. Have a nice day. Wendy took the card slowly, watching Maribel's face. What game is this? No game, Ms. Wise. Just a very interesting morning. Maribel turned and walked toward the mansion. Try to keep up. The main living space had been transformed into a command center. Gone were the documentary cameras and champagne flutes. In their place, construction crews, emergency engineers, and a whiteboard covered in diagrams that Wendy recognized immediately as foundation stress calculations. Beau Mercer stood at the center of it all, phone pressed to his ear, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. I don't care about the optics. Pull the crews back from the terrace. No, all of them. If anyone asks, tell them we're doing a safety review. Pause. Because I said so, that's why. He hung up and turned. His eyes found Wendy immediately. You're late, he said. I was detained at the gate. Someone revoked my access. That was a mistake. Beau's jaw tightened. It won't happen again. Wendy glanced around the room, taking in the controlled chaos. What changed? Everything. Beau walked toward the window, staring out at the terrace where workers were already packing up equipment. Last night, after you left, I had my own engineers run an independent soil test. Off the books. No consultants, no experts, no one who owes me favors. And the ground under my cantilever is saturated to a depth of 14 feet. The water's been accumulating for weeks, maybe months. He turned to face her. You were right. Someone sabotaged my house. Wendy felt the words land, but she didn't let herself react. Not yet. Why are you telling me this? Because I need your help. Yesterday you threatened to bury my career. Yesterday I was an idiot. The admission seemed to cost him something. A crack in the armor, quickly patched. Today I'm an idiot who's running out of time. A commotion at the entrance drew their attention. 3 men in expensive suits were pushing past the security checkpoint, cameras following close behind. At their head was a face Wendy recognized from industry magazines. Orrin Pike, the architect influencer who'd built his brand on tearing down other people's work. Mr. Mercer. Orrin's voice carried across the space like a performance. I'm hearing rumors that your gala is in jeopardy. Care to comment? Beau's expression went cold. This is a private property, Mr. Pike. And this is a public interest story. Orrin smiled, all teeth and ambition. The people deserve to know if the home of the decade is about to become the lawsuit of the century. The cameras were rolling. The crew members had stopped working, all eyes on the confrontation. Wendy could feel the moment tilting toward disaster. One wrong word, one flash of temper, and the narrative would be set in stone. Beau opened his mouth. And then something unexpected happened. He closed it. For 5 long seconds, Beau Mercer stood silent, visibly wrestling with something internal. Pride, maybe. The instinct to fight. The desperate need to control. Then he stepped forward, not toward Oren, but toward the cameras. "You're right," he said. The room went still. "There are legitimate concerns about this structure's foundation. Concerns that were brought to my attention by a member of my team." He gestured toward Wendy, and suddenly every lens in the room was pointed at her. "I dismissed those concerns initially. That was my mistake." Oren's smile faltered. This wasn't the script he'd expected. "Effective immediately," Beau continued. "I'm halting all gala preparations until we've completed a full structural review. My guests' safety matters more than my schedule. My workers' safety matters more than my reputation." "Mr. Mercer," Oren tried to interrupt. "I'm not finished." Beau's voice hardened. "If there are problems with this house, they're my responsibility. Not my architects. Not my contractors. Mine. And I will fix them, publicly, transparently, on the record." He looked directly into the nearest camera. "This is my home. My risk. And if I'm wrong, I'll be the one who pays for it." Silence. Oren Pike stood frozen, his scandal narrative crumbling in real time. The cameras kept rolling, but the story had shifted. Beau Mercer wasn't the villain anymore. He was the billionaire who'd chosen accountability over ego. It was, Wendy realized, the most expensive thing he'd ever done. The crowd dispersed. Oren retreated with his cameras, already spinning a new angle, but the damage to his narrative was done. Maribel fielded calls from sponsors, her voice calm as she explained the proactive safety measures that demonstrated Mr. Mercer's commitment to excellence. Wendy found herself standing alone with Beau on the terrace, the desert wind carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "That cost you," she said. "Millions." Beau's voice was flat. "The sponsors are panicking. The press is already calling it a PR disaster. My board is sending strongly worded emails as we speak." "Then why did you do it?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, stripped of performance, almost human. "Because you were right. And I almost let people get hurt just to protect my image." He looked at her, and for once his eyes weren't calculating. "I've done a lot of things I'm not proud of, Ms. Wise. But I've never killed anyone through negligence. I'd like to keep it that way." Wendy studied his face, searching for the trick, the angle, the manipulation. She didn't find it. "The crack patterns point to one specific footing," she said finally. "Near the drainage outlet I found. If we can isolate the saturation zone and shore up that section, we might be able to stabilize the structure in time." "In time for what?" "For your gala. If you still want it." Beau blinked. "You'd help me save the event?" "After everything, I'd help save the building. The event is your problem." Something shifted in his expression, surprise maybe, or the beginning of respect. "Then let's get to work." They worked through the night. Wendy's pencil moved across blueprints, marking stress points, tracing water flow, calculating load distributions. Beau stayed beside her, fetching coffee, holding flashlights, asking questions that proved he was actually listening. At 3 a.m., Wendy found it, the pattern that connected everything. The crack migration pointed directly to a single compromised footing, exactly where the unauthorized drainage had been directing water. "Someone knew exactly where to hit you," she said, circling the spot on the blueprint. "This wasn't random. It was surgical." Beau stared at the mark. "Who has access to these plans?" "Your architect. Your contractors. Your chief of staff." Wendy hesitated. "Anyone in your inner circle." The implication hung in the air. Before Beau could respond, Maribel appeared in the doorway, her smile as polished as ever. "Good news," she announced. "I've arranged a live interview for dawn. A chance to get ahead of the story." Her eyes flickered to Wendy. "Both of you will participate, of course." Wendy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. "Who arranged the interview?" she asked. Maribel's smile didn't waver. I did. It's going to be perfect. 30 seconds to air. The production assistant's voice cut through the pre-dawn chaos like a countdown to execution. Wendy sat in a folding chair, a microphone clipped to her collar, watching the sun bleed orange across the desert horizon. Beside her, Beau Mercer looked immaculate. Fresh suit. Perfect hair. The mask firmly back in place. But Wendy had seen behind it now, and she couldn't unsee it. Remember, Maribel murmured from behind the camera line, this is a chance to reassure the public. Keep it positive. Keep it simple. And if they ask about the structural concerns, Wendy asked, defer to Mr. Mercer. Maribel's smile was sharp as a scalpel. He's the expert on messaging. The interviewer, a polished morning show host with blindingly white teeth, settled into his chair opposite them. His name was Chad something. He had the practiced sincerity of a man who'd never encountered a question he couldn't monetize. We're live in 5, 4, 3. The red light blinked on. Good morning, America. I'm here at the stunning Mercer estate in New Mexico, where billionaire philanthropist Beau Mercer is addressing concerns about his headline-making charity gala. Chad leaned forward with rehearsed concern. Mr. Mercer, there have been rumors of structural problems with this architectural marvel. Can you put those fears to rest? Beau smiled. The camera loved him. Absolutely, Chad. We've conducted a thorough review and brought in the best experts in the country. This home is safe. The gala will proceed as planned. Wonderful news. Chad's attention shifted to Wendy, and something in his expression changed, subtle, predatory. Now, we're also joined by Wendy Wise, a member of the structural documentation team. Ms. Wise, I understand you were the first to raise concerns about the foundation. Some might say you created unnecessary panic. How do you respond? The question hit like a slap. Wendy felt the trap closing. The framing was deliberate. She wasn't the hero who'd spotted the danger. She was the hysterical woman who'd caused chaos. I documented what I observed, she said carefully. The cracks I measured were real. The drainage issue I discovered was real. Mr. Mercer took those concerns seriously, which is why we're. But isn't it true, Chad interrupted, that multiple expert consultants reviewed your findings and concluded the concerns were exaggerated? They concluded. I have their statements right here. Chad held up a printed page, reading with theatrical gravity. Cosmetic stress fracturing. Within acceptable tolerances. No structural risk. These are direct quotes from Dr. Harrison Vance, one of the most respected engineers in America. He looked up with practiced sympathy. Ms. Wise, were you perhaps out of your depth? The audience at home couldn't see Maribel, but Wendy could. Standing just off camera, tablet in hand, watching the ambush unfold with quiet satisfaction. This wasn't an interview. It was a coordinated demolition. The expert assessment didn't include the drainage data, Wendy said, fighting to keep her voice steady. If I could show you the photos I took. Actually, we have some visuals prepared. Chad gestured to a production assistant. Roll the B-roll. The monitor beside them flickered to life. Footage of the mansion at sunset, all gleaming glass and architectural triumph. Beautiful. Reassuring. Completely irrelevant to anything Wendy had documented. As you can see, Chad narrated, this home represents the pinnacle of modern design. It's a testament to human ambition. And yet, one employee's concerns nearly derailed the entire project. That's not what happened. Wendy reached for her phone. I have time-stamped photos of the drainage outlet. I have measurements showing active crack migration. If you'll just... The monitor went black. I apologize, folks, Chad said smoothly. We're experiencing some technical difficulties with our graphics system. He shrugged with exaggerated helplessness. Technology, am I right? The feed cut to a commercial. Wendy stared at the dead monitor, her chest tight. Her evidence had been ready. Her phone was in her hand, and someone had killed the broadcast at the exact moment she'd tried to show the truth. This wasn't a glitch. This was sabotage. We need to talk. Beau's voice was low, urgent. He'd pulled Wendy aside the moment they were off camera, steering her toward a quiet corner of the terrace while the production crew reset for a second segment. Someone killed my feed, Wendy said, right when I tried to show the photos. I know. You know? Beau's jaw was tight. I saw Maribel's face when it happened. She wasn't surprised. She was satisfied. Wendy's mind raced. You think she's behind this? I think someone on my team has been working against me since the beginning. The missing soil report. The forged summary. The drainage reroute. He ran a hand through his hair, the first unglamorous gesture she'd ever seen from him. And now they're trying to destroy you on live television while I sit there and watch. So do something. Like what? Like telling the truth. Like backing me up instead of letting Chad turn me into the crazy lady who almost ruined your party. Beau was silent for a long moment. Through the windows, Wendy could see the production team preparing for the next segment. Chad was having his makeup touched up. Maribel was speaking rapidly into her phone, her expression unreadable. If I contradict my own experts on live television, Beau said slowly, I lose everything. The sponsors, the board, the reputation I've spent 20 years building. And if you don't, I lose everything. My career, my credibility, my name. Their eyes met. The desert wind stirred Wendy's hair, and for a moment, the world contracted to just the two of them. A billionaire and a nobody, standing on the edge of a cliff that had nothing to do with architecture. You saved my workers yesterday, Wendy said quietly. You halted the build. You took responsibility on camera. Was that real? Or was it just another performance? Beau flinched. The mask slipped just for an instant, and underneath was something raw. Wounded. It was real, he said. Then prove it. The production assistant's voice rang out. We're back in 60 seconds. Beau looked at Wendy. Looked at the camera. Looked at Maribel, who was watching them both with an expression that might have been curiosity or might have been calculation. Then he made his choice. Welcome back, folks. Chad's smile was relentless. We're continuing our conversation with Beau Mercer and Wendy Wise. Now, Mr. Mercer, before the break, there seemed to be some confusion about. There was no confusion. Beau's voice was calm, but something had changed in his posture. He was leaning forward, commanding the frame. There was a deliberate attempt to discredit a member of my team who has done nothing but tell the truth. Chad blinked. I'm sorry. Ms. Wise identified a real structural concern. She documented it with precision and integrity. And someone on my property has been working to silence her. Beau looked directly into the camera. I'm demanding that this broadcast air her evidence in full. Unedited. Right now. Mr. Mercer, that's not really. I own this property. I control what happens here. And I'm telling you that if you don't show her photos, this interview is over and you can explain to your network why you lost access to the story of the year. Silence. Chad's smile had frozen. Behind the cameras, producers were scrambling, phones pressed to ears, voices raised in urgent confusion. And then, miraculously, the monitor flickered back to life. Wendy's photos appeared on screen. The drainage outlet, the moisture seepage, the pencil marks showing crack migration. Time-stamped. Undeniable. That drainage line was not on any approved plan, Wendy said, her voice steady now. Someone added it after final inspection. Someone has been deliberately saturating the foundation. This isn't negligence. It's sabotage. The word hung in the air like a detonation. The interview ended in chaos. Chad tried to regain control, failed, and eventually cut to an unscheduled commercial break while the production team imploded behind the scenes. Wendy found herself standing in the construction trailer, hands shaking, adrenaline crashing through her system. Beau had disappeared into a storm of phone calls, and Maribel was nowhere to be seen. But one detail nagged at her. One small thing she couldn't let go. The forged soil summary. She'd found it in the archive yesterday, a polished document that didn't match reality. But she hadn't examined it closely enough. Wendy pulled the document from her bag and spread it on the table. Standard formatting. Professional letterhead. Nothing obviously wrong. Except, she tilted the page toward the light. There, at the bottom corner, barely visible against the white paper, a smudge. Graphite gray. Pencil residue. Someone had traced this document. Copied it. Created a forgery from a template, and hadn't cleaned the evidence. Wendy's pencil, her constant companion, her humble tool, had left a fingerprint. Not on her work. On theirs. She grabbed her phone and started photographing everything. The smudge. The formatting inconsistencies she'd missed before. The date stamp that didn't quite match the project timeline. This was proof. Not just of sabotage, but of who had access to the template. Who had the skills to forge documents. Who had been in the archive with the opportunity to make the switch. The list was short, and one name kept rising to the top. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop digging. You've already won. Walk away before you lose everything else. Wendy stared at the screen. Then she pocketed her phone, grabbed her pencil, and walked back toward the mansion. She wasn't finished yet. You're setting a trap. Beau's voice was flat, skeptical. He stood in the construction trailer, arms crossed, watching Wendy spread documents across the table like a general planning a final assault. I'm setting a test. Wendy positioned a fresh blueprint at the center. A decoy she'd created an hour ago, filled with deliberately incorrect measurements. Whoever forged the soil summary has access to this archive. They've been watching every move I make. They won't be able to resist correcting this. Correcting it how? The forgery was traced from a template. Pencil residue on the original. Wendy held up her own yellow number 2, chewed at the eraser. Whoever made the fake is meticulous. Obsessive. When they see errors in this document, they'll fix them. It's compulsive. They won't be able to help themselves. And then we'll know exactly who's been trying to destroy your house. Beau studied her face for a long moment. The desert sun was climbing toward noon, and through the trailer window, Wendy could see crews preparing for the gala rehearsal. Tables being arranged. Lighting rigs going up. 300 chairs facing the terrace like an audience waiting for a show. The rehearsal starts in 4 hours, he said. If this doesn't work, then you cancel the gala and we start over. Wendy met his eyes. But it will work. I know who did this. I just need proof that will hold up when the lawyers come. You know who did it? Wendy hesitated. I have a theory, but I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, I destroy an innocent person's life. Tell me anyway. She shook her head. Not until I'm certain. You taught me that much. Something flickered in Beau's expression, surprise maybe, or the uncomfortable recognition that his own words were being used against him. For hours, he said finally. Then we're out of time. He left. Wendy positioned the decoy document prominently on the table, adjusted the security camera angle to capture anyone who approached, and settled in to wait. 2 hours passed. Wendy pretended to work on other files, her attention split between paperwork and the trailer door. Crew members came and went. Callum Rook stopped by to retrieve some blueprints, his manner jumpy and defensive. Inspector Hale made a brief appearance to review the shoring work on the compromised footing. No one touched the decoy. Then, at 2:47 p.m., exactly 48 hours after Wendy had first marked the crack, the door opened and Maribel Gant walked in. Ms. Wise. Her smile was immaculate as always. I wanted to check on the documentation progress. Mr. Mercer is anxious about the rehearsal. Everything's on schedule. Wonderful. Maribel's gaze swept the table, landing on the decoy blueprint. She paused, tilted her head slightly. Is that the updated foundation analysis? Just some working notes. May I? Without waiting for permission, Maribel picked up the document. Her eyes scanned the page, and Wendy watched her face carefully. There. A flicker. Barely perceptible, but real. Maribel had spotted the errors. These measurements seem off, she said lightly, setting the document down. You might want to double-check section 4. Thanks. I'll look into it. Maribel smiled, adjusted her tablet, and left. Wendy waited until the door closed. Then she walked to the table and examined the blueprint. Section 4. Maribel had pointed directly to the incorrect measurements, the ones Wendy had deliberately planted. But that wasn't the trap. The trap was simpler than that. Wendy pulled out her phone and reviewed the security footage from the past 2 hours. Fast-forwarded through the mundane visits. Stopped at Maribel's entrance. There. On screen. Maribel picking up the document. And there, barely visible but unmistakable, her fingers brushing the corner. The same corner where Wendy had dusted a fine layer of graphite powder before positioning the decoy. Wendy checked the blueprint under the light. A perfect thumbprint. Gray against white. Graphite evidence that Maribel had handled the document. And when Wendy compared it to the smudge on the forged soil summary, the one she'd photographed yesterday, the pattern matched. Same thumb. Same angle. Same person. Maribel Gant had forged the documents. The confrontation happened in the main living space, with the rehearsal crowd gathered on the terrace just beyond the glass walls. Wendy had asked Beau for 5 minutes. She'd gotten 3. But 3 was enough. Maribel. Wendy's voice carried across the space, cutting through the pre-event chatter. We need to talk about the soil report. Maribel turned, her expression pleasant, unruffled. Of course. Is there a problem? You forged it. The words landed like stones in still water. Around them, conversations stuttered and died. Crew members turned. Cameras, documentary cameras that had been filming the rehearsal preparations, swung toward the confrontation. Maribel's smile didn't waver. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime. Wendy held up the photographs on her phone. The graphite smudge on the original forgery, the matching thumbprint on the decoy. You traced the template. You created a fake summary that hid the real soil conditions. And you rerouted the drainage to saturate the foundation. Why would I do that? Because you wanted Beau desperate. Vulnerable. Ready to sign whatever emergency contract you put in front of him. Wendy glanced at Beau, who stood frozen near the window, his face unreadable. I found the paperwork in the archive. A proposal for an emergency structural rehabilitation project. $12 million. Awarded to a construction firm that lists you as a silent partner. Silence. Maribel's smile finally cracked. Beneath it was something cold. Calculating. The mask falling away to reveal the machinery underneath. You're a documentation clerk, she said quietly. You think anyone will believe you over me? They don't have to believe me. Wendy pointed at the documentary cameras, still rolling. They just have to watch. The next 30 minutes were chaos. Security arrived. Then police. Maribel attempted to leave and was stopped at the gate. Her tablet was confiscated, revealing a trail of emails, financial records, and communication with a contractor who'd been paid to install the unauthorized drainage line. Beau stood apart from the confusion, watching his carefully controlled world unravel. When the police escorted Maribel toward a waiting vehicle, she paused and looked back at him. I made you, she said. Everything you are. Every deal, every connection, every perfectly managed moment. And you're throwing it away for her. Beau's expression didn't change. You almost killed 300 people to line your pockets. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm cleaning house. Maribel was gone. And Wendy found herself standing alone on the terrace, pencil still in her hand, watching the sunset paint the desert gold. The gala happened. Not on schedule. Inspector Hale required another 24 hours to verify the emergency shoring, but it happened. 300 guests stood on a terrace that no longer trembled. The governor gave a speech about resilience. Donors wrote checks. The documentary crew captured everything. Wendy watched from the edge of the crowd, uncomfortable in a borrowed dress that Beau's assistant had insisted she wear. She'd tried to refuse. She'd been overruled. "You hate this." Beau appeared beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He offered one. She took it but didn't drink. "I hate crowds," she said. "I hate small talk. I hate pretending that any of this matters." "It doesn't." Beau's smile was different now, smaller, more genuine. "The champagne is mediocre. The speeches are boring. Half these people only came to see if the house would fall down. Then why do it? Because sometimes you have to play the game to change it." He looked at her, and for once, there was no calculation in his eyes. Just attention. The same quality she'd seen flickering since that first moment on the terrace, when she'd refused to back down. "You changed the game, Wendy. You didn't have the money or the credentials or the connections. You had a pencil. And you won. I didn't win. The truth won." "Same thing." He raised his glass. "To the truth, then." She clinked her glass against his, but still didn't drink. "What happens now?" "Now!" Beau turned to face the crowd, his profile sharp against the fading light. "Now I rebuild. The house. My team. Maybe myself." He paused. "I could use someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. That's not a job description. That's a personality trait. I'm aware." He looked at her again, and something passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but the foundation of something. Respect. Recognition. The beginning of a bridge across an impossible gap. "Think about it." He walked back toward his guests, and Wendy stayed where she was, watching the stars emerge over the desert. In her pocket, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, different from before. "Nice work. Some of us were rooting for you." She smiled and deleted it. Then she pulled out her pencil, worn, chewed, ordinary, and tucked it behind her ear. Tomorrow there would be new problems, new cracks to measure, new truths to uncover. But tonight, Wendy Wise had proven something that no amount of money or power could erase. Sometimes the smallest tool in the room is the one that holds everything together.